Hello, you are welcome to today's learning on. Welcome to today's series on Azure Developer Study Series. Um, this session is brought to you by the Microsoft Nigeria Azure Community Group, and we've been having an interesting series for the last couple of weeks. So today we are going to be looking at, we are going to be having a discussion on implementing Azure Functions. And our speaker is the one and only Hope. So our speaker is a software developer at Microsoft. And this is someone who has years of experience working with several technologies as a software engineer, deploying application to the cloud. So I'm happy to present to you um, an experienced software engineer, right, who is an in-house developer with Microsoft. So I'll be glad to bring to you on stage now um, Hope and Oluwalolope. Hello,
Hi.
good to have you.
Yeah, good to have you. Thanks for
How's your
having
day
me as
going?
well. Going okay, it's pretty very early, yeah. So um I'm surprised that I'm this awake. It's 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Come on, I'm supposed to be sleeping.
Okay, so before we dive into the session, um, I just like to for you to like tell us a brief. Let's get to meet who our speaker is. How's the tech journey been for you so far? And then what is your experience like in Microsoft?
Okay, that's a whole lot of question. I hope we don't take the entire time doing that. Well, I'm Hope, like everyone already knows, and you already gave it away. I'm currently a software engineer at Microsoft. I I joined Microsoft about like over 2 years ago, but before that, I sort of, lived my entire life in Nigeria. I schooled in Nigeria as well. So I studied computer science in University of Lagos. And while I was in school, I sort of, did my best to be a good student. Let's put it that way. But also I sort of, you know, I felt like there were so many things I had the opportunity to do that sort of set me up to where I am in my career right now, right? Some of which I probably didn't even know I was doing. Like I didn't know they were going to be very helpful right now. Or I didn't know they were going to contribute to, where I am. But I think I just saw those opportunities and I just took them. So some of them are the fact that I made sure I did internships early. So I didn't wait for when my school said you are supposed to go for internship, which naturally is when you get to your fourth year. I did a 5 year course. So I didn't wait. I started internships right from my year two. So I did it out of my own will. Like I just went out, found companies and then sort of applied to them. So I started interning right from year two. I did internship when I was in year two, when I was in year three. So those internships allow me to be able to get a better internship opportunity when I go to that year four part, right? And then when I was in school as well, I was sort of very, invested in developer communities, like student developer communities, trying to, get people together to sort of, learn together, provide a community that allows people to kind of, you know, feel welcomed and feel empowered to hone their own journey, right? So I feel like those two things were very key in sort of helping me shape my journey into who I am today, right? And when I finished school as well, I actually got my offer at Microsoft at my final year while I was in school. That story is a story for another day. But I didn't get to start until after like more than a year when I got the offer, and that was based on different things. So, but I didn't stop there. I sort of still did some internships and worked in several different companies as well. I worked in a bank shortly before I eventually joined Microsoft. And this was because I needed to keep learning or keep expanding my knowledge, my horizon, and all that before I eventually joined Microsoft. Yeah, so that has been my journey so far. And yeah, short story about me. Hi.
Oh,
Looks like you dropped me a
thank you
second.
so much.
It's
That was
okay.
very short. It was that's a very short story and a very interesting storyline. So I believe our audience have one or two things to learn from there. So without wasting much of our time, we'd like to deep dive into the session. So are you ready for us?
Yes, I think so that we don't spend the whole day talking about myself.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm trying to be hopeful that this is going to be beneficial to you, right? So today's session we are talking about Azure Functions and implementing Azure Functions. I'm hoping you can, see my screen right now. So what are we going to be, dealing with today? Majorly, we're going to be talking about, how to implement what exactly Azure Functions are, as regards whether being a developer, coding, writing developing solutions on Azure, right? Or most especially what this series is for is, let's say you are preparing for the Azure Developer Certification exam. What exactly do you need to understand as regards Azure Functions generally, right? So that's sort of like our agenda today, and hopefully we can do like a quick demo to kind of see how Azure Functions are created and how to publish them and all. Okay. So now that we know where we're going, so just a brief overview. I don't know how many people are, you probably, some people will probably be watching this for just trying to have that knowledge or that brief idea of what the actual functions are, or you're probably just watching this because you want to refresh your brain or memory about, actual functions, or again, maybe you are looking at this because you are probably preparing for the Microsoft Azure Developer Certification exam. Whatever your scenario is, I hope this is going to be a very helpful session for you. But just in case if you're here for the exam, I just wanted to highlight, why we're actually doing this session in the first place. Like, why exactly are we doing this? First of all, there are various parts to this certification exam, and the part that takes the heaviest to it, or that takes the chunk of kind of what you are being tested on, is on Azure Compute Solution, which implementing Azure Functions is a part of. And um, when we talk about developing Azure Compute Solutions, which is that big chunk, you can further break it down into, okay, what exactly do they test you on? And the various things they test you on is on, you know how to develop or implement containerized solutions, which is probably handled in it, and which will probably be handled in another session. And the other part is implementing Azure App Service. Um, I know this session was done last week, so if you missed it, you probably want to go back. I know the link is going to be added somewhere. But we had a session on, developing and implementing Azure App Services, so you should check that as well. So, and then this session is on implementing and developing Azure Functions. right? So just giving a why as triggers why we are doing this session. But like I said again, you can also come along, and this session can be also helpful for you if you are getting started in trying to understand what exactly is actually Azure Functions, or what do we mean when people say Azure Functions, right? You are in the right place. This session is for you as well. Okay, so after going through that quick refresher, wanted to also, point out that when you are talking about building an understanding about Azure Functions, whether for certification or whether for even yourself trying to enhance your knowledge, some important things you probably like, how do you want to be able to say, oh, I now grasp what Azure Functions are, or I now have an idea of what we are talking about. Yeah, these are some pointers, right, for you, so that by the end of this section, you can see if we checked these boxes for you, and if we didn't, maybe you come back for me and say this was not a successful session. So, first one is, you need to be able to say you're comfortable with developing, the function code, setting up configuration for it. We're going to talk about that. I know most of this may sound like, what is this right now? But that is what the session is for. You're going to be able to understand this and understand what we mean. So the other part is, understand how to set up the Azure function app itself, and, whether choosing a particular pricing plan, choosing a particular, scaling solution or something, understanding triggers and bindings, and then the function.json file, which holds most of the configuration files. Okay, so now, what exactly are Azure Functions, right? Now, this is the session in proper. Well, first off, I would say, or the definition, how the most likely is going to be that Azure Functions is a serverless solution. It's one of the serverless compute solutions that is been developed in Microsoft Azure Cloud, that allows you to be able to run your code in response to events or in response to triggers, right? Either an event or a condition. So what exactly does this mean? This is kind of another way, we all probably create web applications in one form or shape or the other, right? You've probably created a front-end application before, a back-end application before, and all that. So see this as another type of sort of application-like thing, but a very, very lightweight form of an application. So I like to see this as going to be a very, very lightweight API sort of thing that can only run by some form of events. So you need to be able to kickstart it to run. You need to be able to trigger it to run, sort of, wake it up to be able to say, hey, do this, right? And then because it needs to be very lightweight, because that's the whole point of why it was created. It was created to be able to help, developers, companies, organizations to be able to say, hey, I have this very, very small task that I want to do or that I want to implement, but I don't want to create another new big web application for it. How many times have we, and I feel like a lot of times we fall into that pitfall of, all I want to do is create an Hello World application, but then you have to, create if you're creating this in C Sharp, probably have to create a new, folder, solution, project, all those kind of things, just because I just wanted to do something very, very small. So that's the entire reason why Azure Functions were created, just to be able to ensure that if I want to create a very, very small task, I don't need to spin up a very big, web application with all of the complexity, dependencies that I don't need, and be able to do this very, very easily, right? So look at it as another type of web application that you have created, but it's a very, very lightweight web application that does one thing and one thing well, right? That's the best way to think about Azure Functions, so that you don't complicate it and make it a web application. So your function needs to be something you would call a function as well in a normal class or in a normal, program. So a function needs to be very, very lightweight and does only one thing. Okay, this function sends email. This function, responds to an event and just saves to a database. Something very, very simple, and that just does one thing, right? So that's literally what Azure Functions have, right? It's just, being able to implement a very, very simple task in a very, very simple manner. Just that way. And then, people like to call it a function as a service as well, because what they are necessarily doing is, implementing, creating the ability for you to take what we generally know as a function, like a function method kind of thing, and being able to extend it and make it an actual service. Right. And then this is called Azure Functions in Azure Cloud ecosystem, right? But other clouds kind of implement this similar thing. So you probably would have heard of AWS Lambda, Google Cloud Functions. They practically do the same thing. So, uh, now, what are going to be the use cases of Azure Functions? Because I know I've probably rambled about what exactly Azure Functions are and how they are very, very lightweight, how they should do just one thing and one thing well. So, where can be a use case? Where can you even think about, oh, when should I start thinking about Azure Functions? Or when should I think about putting this to work? A good example would be, when you have a task scheduling kind of thing, right? And I like to say maybe you need to do like a database aggregation, sorry, backup or cleanup, right? And a good example for this would be that um so sorry. So a good example for this would be that, let's say I have a database that does, that sort of people, I keep records in it, right? And I want to be able to aggregate these records based on the fact that um based on maybe machines. Or okay, so a good example that comes to mind is the fact that we have a database that stores in, different machines and the health of this machine, right? Are they healthy, not healthy, that kind of thing. So how do I do it such that every single day, what I care about is how many machines are LD, how many machines are not LD. I can create another Azure function that just takes from this database A that holds this list of machines and aggregates it, sort of just counts. Okay, these are the list of machines I have, how many is LD, how many is not LD, and saves it in another database, right? This is because we have another application that's probably going to query the aggregated database to use it to do something else, to maybe create a report or something, right? So that's a good example of, I just want to be able to do something simple, but I don't want to have to create another entire web application to do that. Take from database A, aggregate it, and save it in another database B. So that's an example of, where you want to do it. Another good example is, I want to send mails, reminder, notification. For example, let's say you have a list of customers and you want to be able to send them monthly mails like, hey, happy new month, blah blah blah, all those mails they send you, right? So you don't want to probably create a new web application or just for sending happy new month mails to your customers. This is something Azure Function can do. Hey, go to our customer database, pull up all our database, pull up the names and emails of our customers database. This is the message you're sending to them, and send the email to them. Something as simple as that is where Azure Functions can come in as well. Then the other part is in, data processing, like maybe an order comes in, like when somebody, schedules an order online, buys something, or all those kind of thing, and you probably want to save them in a queue, right? But all you just need to say is, hey, thank you, your order has been received. And then at the end of the day, you want to be able to take from these queues and save them in the database. So you want something kind of like a background task that does the actual work of saving it in the database. but you don't want to have to create another web application that does that. This is where Azure Functions can come in as well. So those are use cases for Azure Functions, and these are super, super handy use cases that are sort of used a lot right now in many, many organizations or establishments. But you need to remember that there are sometimes Azure Functions are not recommended, right? I know that it's very easy for you to feel like, hey, Azure Functions are great, and the fact that they're actually very cheap when you are running them on the cloud. It's sort of meant to be cheap because, I mean, they only run when you need them to run. And after they finish running, they sort of die. So your cost is not being accumulated. It's not even, it's actually like, I think, one of the cheapest resources right now you can have on the cloud. But then don't complicate, your system by trying to use Azure Functions for every single thing. One good place you probably don't want to use them is when you have a process you want to do is going to consume a lot of CPU or a lot of memory. This is when you have to start doing the hold something in the memory, cache something, and all this kind of thing, and you are having to write several functions to be able to do this process or task you're talking about. Maybe you should start thinking about an actual web application, right? Or where you're having to do something that is not frequent, something that you don't, something that you do sort of every single time, right? Or something that is sort of needed ASAP, right? You probably want to think about Azure Functions because remember, Azure Functions are sort of dead until you wake them up. And imagine when you have to spin up um, something, whether wherever this thing is running, which most times are kind of still Azure App Services. So imagine having to spin up that service and then it having to now respond to your request. So if you're going to factor that time in, the time is going to have to wake up and do its job. If you factor that time in and it's going to probably, annoy your customers, you probably want to not think about Azure Functions, right? So that's just something to place in mind. And the last point is the fact that it doesn't replace a web application. So Azure Functions are very simple for very simple things. Don't overcomplicate it and make it do complex things that it's not meant to do. Okay, so having said that, it's not like how exactly do you work with Azure Functions? So I would say, what are the various concepts I need to know to be able to understand Azure Functions? Well, when we say Azure Functions, or let's cut the Azure away and say functions, literally that is a combination of several things. Because when something has an S at the back, that sounds like plural, right? That sounds like so many things, right? So let's remove the S and look at the exact thing we're talking about here, which is a function. What do we mean by a function, right? What do we mean by an Azure function? Just like the term, just like the way it sounds, right? And if you are familiar with computer science basics, which is the basics of classes, if else conditions, methods and functions, right? That is, it is similar to what exactly the function we talk about in basic, whether we call it object oriented principles or basic computer science principles. It is almost similar to that function we talk about, which is a simple function that is probably part of a class or something, but a simple function that takes in um parameters, maybe, or not parameters sometimes, but it takes in sort of an input and gives us and gives us an output. You know, yes, either gives in or either gives us an output or not, or takes in an input or not. But most times, your function takes in an input and gives us an output, right? So that is exactly similar to the function we're talking about here, right? It is triggered by something, and that something is usually taking in an input, and then you are giving out, an output, which could be most times an action. It could be, my output could be me saving into a database, and my input could be me being a URL being called, right? And a URL is being called, and then I'm being triggered, and then I'm meant to take an action, right, at the end of the day. So this function we're talking about in Azure Functions is sort of similar to that, but it comes in sort of two parts. So the first part is your code, the code you write, which is supposed to be the actual implementation of the fact that, hey, I know that you get triggered by this when this call is made to you, or when this happens, this is what you do. And you are spelling whatever it needs to be done, whatever needs to be done as code. It's either you taking this, you do some computations, either you do X, Y, and Z, or in an example of our, sending monthly email to customers kind of thing. It could be, okay, at the beginning of every month, that is what triggers you. Um, you are taking that action of actually, going into a database, fetching that list and other. So all these things I'm saying are sort of the things you would write as code that you normally do every single day, that you write as code, right? And then the other part is the configuration, which is where you are probably defining what is going to trigger you. How are you triggered, right? And when you're triggered, what do you, what other places do you need to connect to? Like, still on our example of sending monthly emails to customers, or you need to connect to this database. This is the parameters you need to connect to this database. And okay, in this case, probably it's just one database, right? But all those things, whatever parameters or whatever extra thing that's sort of needed to make that function run is part of what we make the configuration. So yeah, so two parts. We have the code, the actual code we literally write every single day, and then the configuration that just makes up how the function works and respond. And then it is controlled by what we call triggers and bindings. And I probably already mentioned or explained this in one way or the other, because triggers, are sort of what kickstarts, or what, how do I wake up this, I don't know, I keep using that word wake up, but how do I, make this function, or this, this function have to come alive. And then bindings are just, whatever external resources, or how it's integrates with other external applications or something. And most times your configurations, including these triggers, these bindings, are sort of defined in a function.json app, but not in every language you need to explicitly create this function.json app. In some languages, as we're going to see, you don't need to like define this. You sort of embed this in your code, and then the language generates it by the time you kind of build the code, right? Anyways, if that just sounded not so clear, we're going to see it clearly when we sort of do the demo, right? Hopefully the demo goes well. But yeah, so that's just a quick summary about functions. It's just, seeing it in the light of, you have codes, you have configurations around it. And then triggers and bindings. I know I already mentioned this, but this is like the core part of um the the core part of functions, right? The fact that you need to trigger it, right? Triggers, like I said here, are a way to make your function run. They define how your function is invoked, how your function is called. And every function can only have one trigger, right? Because again, your function is supposed to be very, very lightweight and do one thing and one thing only. So what is that one thing that would, make your function do its work, is that one trigger. So you can only have one trigger for a function. When you start having to think about, hey, this function, can we have another trigger? Maybe you should start looking at building a web application. So, but then the other side is bindings. Bindings are a way to, like I mentioned already, connect to other resources. This could be the fact that I need to connect to an external database. I mean, databases are going to be external to your function if your function is going to be standalone. So, um, how do I connect to these external resources? Going back to our example of, monthly customer emails, how do I connect to this customer database to actually get their names and emails? A way to be able to define that is through bindings. You add in your connection string to the database and all those kind of things. So the last point I kept here is to be able to say a trigger can actually be seen as a binding, because it is sort of an external resource to your application. It's sort of an external resource to your function, but it's a way to still invoke your function, right? But not all bindings are triggers, obviously. Like we've already established that you can only have one trigger. So meaning that even though a trigger can actually be a binding, so meaning that you can actually define, your trigger as a binding to your application, but every other bindings you have are just going to be seen as bindings to your applications. Okay, before I move on, there's something I didn't add here, that in a binding, you sort of have directions into your bindings, and the direction could be that it is coming into your application. So this resource is probably connected inwards into your application, like it's probably bringing data or bringing something into your application, or you have out. The direction could be out, meaning that your function is taking something out, taking something into the other resource, right? Okay, either going to be, saving something into a database. If I'm going to be saving something into a database, the direction is going to be out, right? Or the other direction could be in and out, meaning that, for this resource, so let's say, for example, um, I have a database. I am taking either a name or something out of that database. I'm doing something with it and still saving back into that database. So that direction is going to be in and out as well, right? So that's just something I didn't put in here, but just something to note about directions with bindings. And then finally, we now have what is called the function hub, right? Now, the function hub is that actual application, or I won't say, I would say kind of like that box that sort of runs our Azure functions. So I will put it in the light of the fact that the same way Azure App Service sort of runs your web application. So you create your web application on, your application on your local with probably with any language of your choice. I create a PHP application, for example, a C# web application, for example. Now that application is standalone, and then what I do is deploy it into an Azure app, app service that now runs my application. Right. That's function app is to functions. So you create your functions with any language of your choice, and then if I want to deploy this into something that the cloud will run for me, that something is function app. So this is sort of like, the deployment engine for our Azure functions. And you can have multiple Azure functions being deployed into one function app. So you can see that function app as just, probably this blanket that encompasses several Azure functions and runs them together as like one unit or something, right? So you need to be careful as well on how you choose, what function app runs your functions, or the number of functions, what group of functions am I running together on one function app. You need to be careful of how you do that. So that's about function app. And I think with that, we've said all, and, done all the talking. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that gives some context. So I'm saying a demo because I wanted us to walk through together on what it means to actually create an Azure function and then deploy it into a function app that we can now have running or something. Sorry. So I'm going to have a demo. Let me first end my slideshow. And we can walk through this together. So I'm going to be creating function, an Azure function, like we've established, right? An actual Azure function. I'm going to be creating it in C#, uh, creating a new project. So wanting to actually establish it, wanting to point out, sorry, keep using the word established. Wanting to point out is the fact that you can actually write your function in any language, because like I said, it is just like creating a web application that you don't have to worry about, oh, I'm deploying it in so place right now. When you're focusing on the function itself, you can create it with any application. Though I feel like right now it's not all languages that are really supported, but most of the popular languages are. C# is supported, Java is supported, um, JavaScript as well. I'm not sure about PHP. Sorry. But one beautiful thing is that because this is independent of your normal web application. So let's say I have a standard, you know, e-commerce web application, or a standard customer uh resource CRM sort of application that is like this big giant application. My Azure function is independent of it. It is separate from it. So I can decide to write my Azure function in any language I choose, and then it still does the same work. So it still runs. It goes to that same database that this customer application is probably writing to, and it does whatever it needs to do independent of this big application I have, right? So you don't need to worry about the fact that maybe I wrote my custom application in PHP, and I think to my knowledge so far, and I may be wrong, I don't think PHP is supported in Azure Functions, but you don't need to worry about that. I mean, you can write your Azure function in JavaScript or C# and deploy it and run, and they can both work together in doing whatever you need them to do. So I'm going to be writing this Azure Functions in C#. We're going to be using C#. So I have it in Visual Studio right now. You can do the same thing in Visual Studio Code, or you can create this directly from the Azure portal. But I choose to create this in Visual Studio. So I come here, create a new project, and then I already created one recently, so that's why I have it here. But if you don't have it, you can just search for Azure Functions and it should come out. But I have it here. It came out already. So I'm going to say next, and then you can give it any name and save it wherever you want it to be saved. I have a folder called Azure Functions, so I'm going to call this a test function. So just in case I have one already, And then I'm going to say next. And you get to choose whatever framework you want to use. Well, I'm just going to put the default. Then yeah, you can choose the trigger, right? The how you like we mentioned already about triggers, we mentioned what bindings are as well. So you can choose how your application is going to be triggered from here. There are several trigger sort of how would I call them? Yeah, trigger types. Yeah, they are types. So several trigger types that you can use, but I think the most popular one is always, HTTP trigger, such that with when a URL call is being made, it sort of triggers the web application. The other one is true timer, which we have here. So that's the one that probably will work. Sorry, that's the one that probably will work in the scenario I mentioned about sending monthly emails to our customers. So the timer trigger would be something that will be helpful. But for the purpose of this demo, I'll be using HTTP trigger so that we can be able to test it and see it work. Because with timer, we don't want to wait till the beginning of another
Hel-
year. Can you?
Hello.
Hi.
Please, can you make the screen bigger?
Ah,
Second.
okay. Oh no, that didn't help. Let me see. I think I should be able to do that. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Mm, display. Sorry, wrong screen. So this. Okay. Yeah, I think that works. Let me see. Yeah, is it better now?
Ye- yes.
It's better. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Also, if it's possible to make it a white background.
Ha! Wow, that's okay. I think we will do that when I finally open this up. So let me just complete this space. Yeah, we'll try that. So let me just yeah, after I complete this. So to move forward, so we're going to be using HTTP trigger, and then the other part I wanted to mention was the authorization level. So like it says, um, so it sort of just controls how your function is being who has access level to your function, right? Same way we do, role-based access control, those kind of things that we sort of use in the cloud to manage security, right? So this just talks about um how you want to strategize sorry, how you want to sort of work around access issue access and security around your Azure function. So we're going to use anonymous for the purpose of this demo again to make it easier to be able to test. And then let's create this. Okay, so now we can change the background and I think it's mm, where do you do that? Uh, no. Where do you do that? Can't remember. Options. Okay, I got it. Okay, so now you have it. All right, so let me bring this down. So when we create, I created a C sharp, based sort of Azure functions already. So it's created the code in C sharp, and when you create your Azure function, one annoying thing that you probably want to, I mean, you just get used to it, is the fact that it creates the class name with a default name of function one. You can always update this yourself with just renaming the function, you renaming the file, and then renaming the function name, right? You need to do these two things. If you are not kind of familiar with C sharp, what this means is that the file name is always different from the class name and function name and all that you are creating. So you sort of need to do this to manually yourself. So that's just the only one annoying thing you probably just need to pay attention to if you are so big on you know your names and organization of your files and all that. So but we can skip that because I am not, plus time is failing us. So it comes in when we create our Azure functions. It sort of comes in with a default um, function or a default function class kind of thing. Let's put it that way. And what this just means is that this is going to be um, triggered, HTTP trigger by, and it's going to be triggered, in a kind of API way. So meaning that once an API is called, this function is going to be run. Like we are going to run this function based on this API call, sort of an API call kind of thing, right? And then get post means the different ways the different ways we can do the API call, right? We can decide to make this just get alone or just post alone. And they are just the different types of API ways, or API, what do we call them? Yeah, I sort of forgot the name. But yeah. So and then authorization level anonymous, just like I selected. And then one thing I just now wanted to point out is the fact that if you see here, I know you probably saw that I talked about something called functions or JSON, but it's not added here, and I'm not kind of having to adjust that. That's because with C sharp language, everything is sort of embedded into the code, and you don't have to be worrying about managing the code separate from the configurations. So I can add my configurations as what you call uh annotations. So these things are sort of annotations on your functions or on your classes. So I can manage them with annotations, manage the configuration with annotations, as opposed to having to create a separate functions to JSON um, file that I'm trying to manage. But if you want to probably, make things more organized for yourself, you can obviously create that functions or JSON file and manage your configuration there. Okay. So, but I'm going to leave things the way they are because we're running out of time and all that. But simply what this function is doing, the one thing and one thing is just doing is that it's taking, a name. So it's expecting a name as part of the query. So since this is going to be like more like an API call, to be honest, it's just going to be an API call. So since it's going to be an API call, it's expecting that as part of the query, it's going to come in with a parameter called name. So this is going to be sort of part of the payload that's going to be sent with that query, and then it takes in the name payload and reads whatever the value is, right? Sort of reads whatever the value is, which is going to be part of the data, and then it saves the name as name sort of thing, and then what it just does is creating this response message that it prints out for you. So it returns and sort of okay kind of thing to say, hey, okay, I saw your request, and adds the response message to be part of the message I sent back. Right. So if we're going to run this, and you're going to see, so we can actually run it now. Um, we can run it as just a normal way I would run any C# application, and it should run for me. Yeah. Uh, what's happening? Hmm. Oh, okay. Okay. It's running now. Okay, so now it's sort of built and ran, and it's telling me that I can access this function right now with this URL. So, like I said, it's more like an API call because we are trigger. It's an HTTP trigger, which is going to be like triggered based on a URL, right? So I'm going to uh, create a new. I'm going to open my browser and add this URL to it, and then add the name parameter it is expecting. I would add my name, and when I run this, it should trigger my application, and it sends that message back to me, which is hello, my name, and just so this is just the simple this thing of this is the input is going to be the URL with the name payload, like with this payload added to it, and then what it sends out is this response, right? Normally, this, if you want to make your application, is going to be more complicated than this, and all, but just a simple show kind of thing of how this thing works. So this is me testing it out. So I'm going to stop this, and now let's deploy this. I don't know why I'm having this error, but yeah. So that is me testing this application and see that it works, and it works correctly. I can see that I can run my function and it does what I want it to do. So now we have our function. How do we take it to the cloud, right? How do we deploy it? How do we have it running on Azure? That is where us, publishing and deploying it comes in. And to do this, you can do this with just one simple click as you publishing from this Visual Studio. And I go to where do I want to be publishing? Like, this is simple, easy flow. To be honest, Azure has done a big work integrating Azure with Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio to make life easy for you. And yes, I am not advertising Microsoft Azure, but I'm in one way doing that. So things are like made super easy right now for you as a developer, and you don't have to worry about managing configuration and all this kind of thing anymore. But anyways, moving on. We want to publish it into Azure, and then where do we want to use this, which is like different, Azure function have variants, deploying it into a container app, all this kind of thing. Let's just go to Windows. Make things easier and faster. We are running out of time. So now it's automatically picked up my Azure sort of details because I've logged them before. But if you have not, what you're probably going to see here is, log into your Azure, um, log into your Azure portal or something, signing into Azure. I think that's what you would see or something. But it's just super easy and intuitive, and you'll be able to follow along. Okay, I will respond to the message chats. The I'll respond to questions sort of in a minute. I just want us to go through rush through this. So it's sort of already picked up my Azure account details because I already signed in, and it picked up my subscriptions. If you had so many subscriptions, you just need to select a particular subscription, and then you can create the function hub. So I don't have any function hub currently that I want to deploy this into. So I'm going to create a new function hub. So I give it a name. I'm going to leave all this as default. I'm going to use a default, a resource group already created so that we don't waste time spinning that up. And location will be where my resource group is located, West US. And then Azure Storage account. Every sort of so every Azure Function app needs an Azure Storage account. So whether you want it or not, but yeah. So I'm going to. I think we can create a new one. Yeah, I created a new Azure Function storage account, and if I want to add application insights as well, so that you can get logs and all those details, and then sorry, we're just going to create. So this is going to take a lot of time. No, not really like a lot of time, but it may take some amount of time. And once this is completed, I think what just happens is that you see your service deployed in Azure already, and I can go into my Azure portal and actually see this function hub there and this function deployed in it, and I can run that function hub and it will still do the same thing, like I said, right? So I don't know if it's going to finish up before we end the session, or I'm just going to leave it here. And if you are following along, what you can just is once you have this up and running, you can either follow from the screen, like follow the URL, because it's going to give you a URL that's tied to the function hub for you to be able to continue. Like if I run that same URL and test it out to do the same results of what I had earlier when I tested it, or if you had this as a full-fledged, you know, actual function, Azure function hub that is actually doing something. So maybe what you now want to do is take that URL and probably add it to your normal web application or something, right? So yeah, so that is sort of like the short and quick demo of how easy it is to be able to create an Azure function and do whatever you want with it, right? So I'm going to take some questions before I sort of head back to my slides and complete this. I think this is loading already. Okay, finish. Yeah. So a question here is I can see Franca asking, can I use Azure function for email marketing? Um, if you mean email marketing in the sense that okay, um I'm sending a maybe monthly subscription. What do they call that thing? No, not subscription. What the when you're sending emails, because sorry, I'm running short of words right now. But
Maybe sort of newsletter.
yes, that was what I was looking for. Thank you. A screen bigger. Mm, Do I need to make it a bit bigger again? Is this not enough?
Again, that's fine.
Yeah, we're actually passed out of time now anyways. Yeah, so yeah, like thank you so much. Maybe like if you mean like newsletter, it depends on, what you want to do with it. Yes, you can, because you can use like a time, based you can use like a time-based trigger kind of thing that sends your newsletter every day, month, or any time of the week. And what you have is that you probably save the content in maybe a database or something. So you have where the content is going to be picked up from, and then you code it such a way so that I think that's what we even do today in some places where you have the email content saved somewhere, and then your application takes that content and sends it as an email to several of your customers. So I would say yes, to be honest, because you can code your function to do things like that. just pick up the content from wherever you have it and sending it to a list of customers from a database from any file or any place you have them. Yeah, bulk email. Yeah, sure. So if you have the email somewhere, the major thing is finding where your input is going to be coming from and or your data is going to be coming from. So once you figure that out, that is it's super easy to add it as a binding to your function and then it does it. As long as it supports that kind of binding. So most likely your emails are going to probably be saved in a you see that you probably want to use blob storage, Cosmos DB, or whatever that is being supported, and you are able to pick those emails from there. Um, Another one says, can one filter the IP or host that can access URL provided to make calls, say like calls for API? Yes, yes you can. But I wouldn't say filtering out the IP or host. I would say it's more like giving access privileges. So when I did it, I think they're like three different access privilege. There's anonymous, there's function. I can't I can't remember the third one. I should check what the third one is. But these three, you probably want to read about, I know the anonymous one is anybody can access it. Function, maybe you that's probably what is going to be, the cost related one you're talking about. So, but you probably just you want to look into how you want to define this. And then the last one I can't remember, but there are different access levels that allows you to be able to restrict access to your functions. So definitely yes, you can restrict access to the URL. So is there any other question? But if there is none, I think, yeah. So we have our function app site deployed, and I can pick this and come back to my URL browser and do the same thing. And he says my app is running. Yep. So I have been able to successfully deploy my function into my function app, and I have my function app up and running. Not sure why it is not showing that name back kind of thing. Yeah, sorry. I was expecting it to have to show the same response. It should. Okay. Probably sometime I'll look into. Maybe it wasn't supposed. It wasn't going to do that. I don't know. But yeah. So yeah. So that is just a quick way to be able to say and to be able to create an actual function and actually deploy it into a function app and have it like up and running. So I did all that super easy without even having to go to Azure portal. Like I've not even logged into my Azure portal yet, except if I'm going to log in right now to go and see why I didn't see the response I had when I tested my application. That's all. But yeah, so I just wanted to be able to show how easy it is to be able to, do that and make your Azure function come to life. So if you want to do any other additional thing, like, connecting to a database, modifying something, creating an email, saying, oh, send this at a particular time of the year, blah, blah, blah. That is now where you modifying the entire code comes in and actually writing that code kind of thing. So with that, I have come to the end of my demo, and back to my slide. Yeah, so I just wanted to be able to, let me not share screen. So what I've just wanted to be able to point out is the fact that we have some resources, and these resources are just the same resources we had. Maybe we're just probably going to share it on the chat, or probably add it to the description of um, this session. So it's just more around Microsoft Learn, where you can actually learn more about Azure Functions, and this whole function hub, actually going through a lab and you setting up your Azure function. I think that the lab on this used Visual Studio. So if you're not a use Visual Studio Code, VS Code. If you're not a Visual Studio fan, you can do this on Visual Studio Code as well, like the same process of creating your function and deploying it into Azure without even going to Azure portal. You can do that on VS Code as well. And then I saw this YouTube video, which was super, super good. The person really went in details as regards what Azure functions are, understanding the various concepts and components, doing a better job than I just did. So that's one other resource you can use. And with that, I want to say thank you for listening or coming into the session, and probably listening to me to the end. If you came to the end of this, thank you so much. And feel free to ask me questions, give me feedback on how this session was for you, if you met your expectations or not, or any feedback at all. Feel free to drop it by reaching out to me on LinkedIn as well. If you can grab the um if you can grab my LinkedIn name from this page or whatever. But yeah, with that said, if we don't have any questions, I don't know. I don't think we have any questions. Yeah, I don't think we have any questions.
Okay, so we have a follow-up question. How can I use it for bulk email then? So it's a follow-up question to Franca's question.
How can we use this for bulk email then? So when you mean bulk email, I'm guessing. So my thought is going to be like, you have the emails in a database, right? If you have them, I don't want to assume that you just have them in an Excel sheet, because the way functions work is that they are sort of not going to be, they are going to be deployed like in a normal web application. And your normal web application, if it's going to be interacting with data, it's interacting most likely with databases, right? So think of your Azure function that same way. It's going to be interacting with a database. So if you need it to actually pick up data from somewhere, you need to have a database. So I'm going to assume that you have a database. Is either you're using, Cosmos DB or anything, any database that Azure provides, which are several of them, or you can use blob storage to store files. So if you want to just store them as maybe a CSV file or something, so you can use blob storage, right? Save, you have those emails saved in a storage form location or what sort, like with either you're using blob storage or you're using a database. Now you have those emails there, right? Now I don't know what type of email you want to send. Is it a dynamic email that will change? Is it a static email that is the same thing? Like, okay, is it that whenever, like, I don't know what scenario or what your bulk email wants to do. If it's going to be a newsletter kind of thing, I'm assuming it's a static, but you probably don't want to be changing your Azure functions every single time you want to send your newsletter. So I would say determine what is going to be static about the email, what is something that would continuously not change, what is something that is dynamic about the email, and then whatever is going to be dynamic about the email should be saved in a database or a blob storage. Like I said, just one form of storage or the other. And then you now code your application such that, so if I'm going to use, or you have the data in Excel, so you can use blob storage to save it as a CSV file, right? So you're going to use blob storage to have it as a CSV file. And then you have your Azure Functions pick these CSV files and um, pick the emails as well. If your email are in a database or they are in blob storage as well, it picks the email, picks the data, which is it picks the email, which is the data, and picks the, now we're confusing it. It picks whatever content, wherever you save the content. So if I'm going to do this for myself, right? I'm going to assume that the content of my email may change based on whatever I want. It could be that, oh, I'm saying, hey, we have this new product in town, blah, 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 and all that. Or tomorrow I am saying, we are just reaching out to know how you're doing, all this kind of thing. So I'm assuming my email will always change. My email content will always change. So I would have my email as well in a form of storage. So it's either I'm using database or I'm using blob storage, and my emails, the customer emails as well are going to be saved somewhere, right? So you are coding your function to be able to access these two storages, and you are able to say email is taken from storage A, email content is taken from storage B, and then send this content in this format or whatever way you want to arrange it, right, to these emails. So I don't know if that explained it, but I feel like it's something that is doable. Now that I'm saying it to myself, I feel like it is something that is super, super doable, very, very easy to do, right? The major thing is figuring out how you have this data in an Azure storage that is going to be accessible to your functions. So Franca, does that help? I don't see your message. So I'm guessing you're probably still thinking about what I said. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you or I do not explain it well, but just in summary, just know that it is doable. You just need to figure out how you want to, put your customer emails and the email content in a storage that is accessible to your functions. You're welcome. So, Placid, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly, but you said, can one make a post request with data to Azure? Yes, sure. If you see the demo I shared, you can see that we made the URL such that you can access it either through a get, you can make it either a get request or a post request and still send in that same payload and it's going to receive it. So it can be a post, you can make it a post request, a post only request, which most people do actually, which is part of the security kind of form you're trying to do. Most people tend to make the URL post request. So it's not something I can easily just access via a URL or something. So Placid, does that answer your question? Okay. I don't think I don't see us having any other question. Nice.
Thank you so much, Hope. I don't think there's any question for now.
Yeah.
But if you have further question, you can reach out to Hope on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
What platform are you mostly active on?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn, if you want to get me. I may not respond immediately. I'm not the best in messaging, but LinkedIn for sure, I will get back to you.
Okay, so Hope is available on LinkedIn. You can connect with her in case Microsoft is doing giveaway and
Hope you know Microsoft has over 10,000 employees.
So, thank you so much. It was a loaded information, and I believe you did justice to the topic. And I'm delighted to have you, and believe that we're going to have more sessions in the future. Subsequently, so if you're in the Microsoft Nigeria Azure Community Group, I think Hope is a leader in the Azure community, so you can reach out to her for anything clarification, or you're having challenges or career advice. I believe she does that for free.
Wow.
All right. It was good to have you.
Yeah, me
It was,
too. It was nice. It was nice being here. And thanks again for listening to me. And I just hope the session was beneficial to someone. Yeah.
okay. So for our online audience, we appreciate you for. I mean, it's not easy to be online for an hour, so we truly appreciate you. So this is a continuous series. Next week we're going to be having another session. And then tomorrow we have a Linux series. So if you're interested in learning Linux, so this is the third series that we'll be having tomorrow. So you can tune in by 3 p.m. West African time. So it's going to be a whole lot of learning this month, next month. So if you've not joined our community, please kindly do so. We're available on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on Meetup. Check the Azure Nigeria user group on LinkedIn, Azure Nigeria user group on Meetup, and Azure Nigeria on Twitter. So we like to connect with you. We like to get feedback, right? And thank you so much for, once again, thank you so much for being part of this community, and we sincerely appreciate you. Bye.
Hey, everyone.